Welcome back to the Tropical MBA podcast. As many of you know, Ian and I are here in sunny Barcelona with so many listeners of the podcast who've grown $1 million businesses. And for those of you listening along at home, we've got one on the show today. So the question is, how do you add that next $1 million of revenue to your business through marketing specifically? A big challenge in 2025. Today's guest suggests consider going deep versus wide on that funnel. So we all fantasize about more leads, but what if treating the leads you do have with a greater degree of care and investment is a viable path to unlocking more revenue, more leads, and more reviews for your business? So today's guest has done exactly that with a unique strategy for giveaways that we all can replicate in our businesses. And he credits this strategy with the impressive growth his company has seen over the past 5 years, and he's got the receipts to prove it. So without further ado, today's guest is Timothy Moser, and he's the founder of LearnCraft Spanish. Today, we're going to learn why he founded the business, how he gets the most out of entrepreneurial events, and how specifically they can help you unlock growth, and how he leverages giveaways to create powerful launches that grow his lead base dramatically, and importantly, his revenue. All this while he manages a large team as a founder while spending the majority of his time on growth. All very impressive stuff. Let's jump right into it.
We're going to start with the easiest question, your name and what it is you do.
I'm Timothy, and I run LearnCraft Spanish, which is a program for adult learners who want to learn Spanish as a second language. And it's specifically designed for people who are really, really serious about fluency. They've tried everything else, but what they really want is to connect with the Spanish speakers in their lives more deeply. Let's say you've married into a Spanish-speaking family, or like many people listening to this show, you've moved to a Spanish-speaking country and you've realized that the low-ticket info products and apps are not doing it for you. So business-wise, we do that through a productized service. We get these students into a coaching program that charges them by month. We use a curriculum that our entire team has put together, and we have elements of face-to-face coaching, software, and a bunch of other stuff that we give all of our students.
Would it be possible for you to do this if you weren't an expert at Spanish?
Well, I started not as an expert in Spanish. I started this as a hobby. Actually, I had a hobby site for accelerated learning. Like so many people back in around 2010, I was excited about things that I read in the 4-Hour Chef and in like all these books about accelerated learning. And I kind of had a hobby site giving me challenges for things to learn. One time I randomly memorized the periodic table in one afternoon just as a challenge. But my audience kept requesting language. And I was like, I'm not an expert on this at all, but I could hire some people on Upwork. It was called Elance at the time. And I could have them help me basically with their native speaking expertise and my knowledge of accelerated learning, and we can put them together into something that I could use and my students could use. And lo and behold, there was demand for it, and it turned into a business.
I was kind of curious about how many businesses did you try and start before you stumbled upon this? And as a context, can you help the audience visualize your business? How many people work there? Where do you work from? What do the meetings look like? I'm assuming you don't have a office building with LearnCraft Spanish written on the side of it.
I do have an office with the word LearnCraft on it, but I have been running this thing virtually the entire time. The reason I have an office is so that I can do YouTube videos, and it's basically my studio. We're a team of about 30, and it's fully virtual. We run on EOS, so probably everybody on the podcast has heard of this, EOS Traction by Gina Wickman. And so the leadership team is me, my director of coaching. She has the biggest team of coaches. My number 2, my integrator, is Katie. And then we also have a director of technology, and he has one engineer under him. We have a weekly pattern of meetings for every department. The leadership team meets every week. And then the marketing team, which is basically me and my integrator for now, we meet every week as well. And the way that the business works in terms of business model is we mostly get our students through our podcast, or they've watched our YouTube videos, and they opt into a free version of our course. And we release our entire course for free, about 250 lessons to teach the top 1,000 words in Spanish. And then from there, we upsell them into a little tripwire product, like a 1-month challenge where they can do the top 100 words of the language with the support of my team and the students around them, and kind of do a daily challenge that way. And at the end of the challenge, there is basically a, hey, you've made it this far. Wouldn't you like to achieve the same results for another 6 months? And that upsells them into a coaching program. And students stay in that coaching program actually on average for 7 or 8 months.
This is a serious operation, Timothy. Did you identify back in 2010 as founder, entrepreneur? Were you doing a bunch of projects? Like, where did all this come from?
Even in 2010, when I was still in college, I knew that I wanted to do business. I actually studied music specifically because I wanted to get a degree, but I didn't want to get a degree that I would get a career out of. I don't know why that was my reasoning at the time. I knew that I wanted to do business. And so when I got out of college in 2012, I kind of hit the ground running with online business stuff. I was listening to all the podcasts back then. I was doing all the stuff that we were doing back then, blogging, trying to start a podcast. I started something about productivity, and then I kind of simultaneously started the stuff about accelerated learning. And the goal was I was just kind of going to spread out my different options at the time. During college, I did like tutor the PSAT, so I kind of was in business already. And just based on my modest success in that, I knew that I would make a terrible employee, and I would rather set my own rules and forge my own path.
Where are you based, just for some context for this conversation?
I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I grew up outside of Tulsa. I went to the University of Tulsa, and then as soon as I could, I shook the dust off of my feet and did the digital nomad thing. So I went to Argentina for 5 months. I went around the US. I went to Europe, but I'm based in Tulsa again now, although I get out to DC events and do other travel as often as I can.
We've spoken many times, and I always walk away with something I learned. I feel like your approach is uniquely methodical. Maybe from this background, well, you teach people. And so even in a casual conversation, the way you frame things up, it's very easy to take pieces from your journey and to implement them in ours. But I am curious, you just got off a flight from London. You were at DCX London, and you mentioned to me that you went into that conference with a methodical approach. Like, walk me through like the conference experience and like what your mindset is as you like leave the company and kind of dunk yourself into this entrepreneurial whirlpool.
Pretty much every time I go to a DC conference, which is a few times a year, I am leaving the business with a lot of things that I'm like, man, shouldn't I be working on XYZ? The problems are different every time, but I'm always like, if I wasn't going to the conference, I could be working on this other thing. But then what I do on the plane is I sit down and I make a bunch of notes of like, well, this will be a successful conference if I can figure out this thing, if I can have a bunch of conversations about this other thing, and if I can get these specific people's perspectives on whatever.
What's an example of like one of those things?
One of those things this time around was figuring out, so our top of funnel strategy, our strategy for just acquiring leads and email opt-ins is not performing the way that it did a year ago. So what I'm trying to figure out is if we were to start from scratch, if we didn't have the audience that we have now, and we were just finding a new channel to acquire leads, what would we do? And it's one thing to look that up online, but it's another thing to get into a room full of other business owners who are interested in each other's well-being and in each other's businesses, and ask them, what are you doing right now that's working? What would you do if you were starting over from scratch, especially as the online landscape has been changing so quickly in the last couple of years? So I got a lot of perspective on that in London.
How do you think of conference ROI? There is a sentiment that, you know, networking is lame, going to conferences is lame. And me and you go to conferences a lot and feel differently. I'm curious as to what you would say to somebody that's like, why don't you just like stay home and work on your business?
If you're going to conferences just to watch talks, you should be on YouTube instead and watch the talks there. Pick your favorite expert on that talk. At DCX London, there were 4 talks. And that was just enough. And the reason is 4 talks was just enough to spur the conversations that we needed to have with the speakers and with each other on those topics. The beauty of a conference is you have a bunch of people in the same room that are learning from each other and learning dynamically, not just passively listening to things. And so the thing that I love about DC conferences is they're focused on masterminding and on connecting with similar businesses and with diverse businesses so you can learn from what's working for each other. And yeah, I think at DCX London, the things that Nolan, Shona, and John did were just optimized to cause these really high quality connections and conversations that go really deep, both business and personal.
You mentioned your team's kicking you out the door to go to Bangkok in October. What did they say?
Yeah, I came back from DCX London and I was like, man, we've got a lot of work to do. And if I go to Bangkok, I live 12 hours apart from Bangkok in terms of time zone. It's going to be a big deal if I step away for that amount of time, but I really want to go. How should I think about this? And my leadership team is just like, look, every time you come back from these conferences, you have so much more perspective and you're so much more recharged for the business. They're like, you have to go to Bangkok. And I was like, crap, I guess I have to go to Bangkok.
You're there to supply the vision. And sometimes it's hard to have vision when your head's down on your laptop every day, going to meetings, working on product. I feel the same, like those plane rides to and from conferences, a lot of dominoes fall into place. And it's hard to have a complicated vision. And day-to-day ops can be, a lot of different things going on. So like, what is the vision? Like, what are we doing for the next 90 or 180 days in this company? I always come back from these DC events with like a word or two and a metric associated with it and something that we're going to really align the company around.
I have a 7-figure business and we run on EOS. So we kind of know every quarter what we're trying to achieve. We've set that intention already, or we're about to set that intention. And so what I do is, as I'm processing, going to these events, I'm like, in terms of setting that vision and figuring out that perspective, what are kind of the specific questions I need to be asking? And what are the things that I don't know and couldn't simply Google that I need to learn from other people to help me get those goals in line and have an idea of how we're going to approach the challenges we have.
What would be your take on how disruptive the changes in SEO have been to online entrepreneurship, and what are people doing about it?
Different people have different perspectives on it. SEO was never my strong point. I had a successful podcast that was doing really well, and that's not Google SEO. Typically, that's just like basic podcast SEO. People search for Learn Spanish in Spotify or Apple, and they find us that way. Even our podcast listenership came from people searching for topics in Spanish, and we're finding our podcast that way, even in Google. And that's fallen off a lot. Basically, search across the board is happening much less, both because people can just go into ChatGPT and ask, what's the difference between these two words in Spanish? And because when they go to Google and they ask that question, it doesn't tell them to go read an article. It just gives them an AI answer, which is kind of good for the user experience in many ways. But it means that almost all of us are getting about 60% of the traffic we used to get. And if you're running a tight ship, that's a big deal.
Yeah. So many of our businesses effectively started with the idea of that information arbitrage on Google. That was what was so inspiring about that 2012 era, because you would go to Google and then you understood how powerful of a tool it was, but then you would see all these gaps. You'd be like, well, there's really nothing here about this thing that I'm interested in or know about. And so a lot of DCers started their businesses as like just these gap fillers. Like, man, if we could just have a great resource on Google, we're going to get all this attention. And then bam, you've got a business. It's an interesting moment where we've got this momentum from that decade. And now it's like, well, how are we going to adjust given that those arbitrages are going away, pretty rapidly this year? And I think everybody kind of expects that arbitrage will end at some point.
And it's not completely gone, and maybe it's hard to say whether it'll completely go away. One thing that people are pretty bullish on is YouTube, which, again, being a little bit lucky, I kind of was starting to build our YouTube channel pretty seriously a year ago. And that's just because the audio podcast had plateaued, and I was thinking, what else can I do? What's going to be a promising area of growth that I feel like I can do well? And that's what I'm seeing too. Not only are we getting, a lot more leads from YouTube than we used to, but those leads are actually converting better into paying customers. And I think that has to do with the fact that in a world of, a bunch of written content that's just churned out by AI, what's harder to fake and what YouTube also penalizes is, when AI pretends to be human. If you actually are a human on a YouTube, video telling people about your experiences or just connecting with them, even just telling a lesson, people are more likely to trust you. And many people do go and search for something just because they want a quick answer.
Those gaps do exist on YouTube.
They do. They really, really do. That's what's kind of exciting, even as times are a little bit hard. That's like really exciting and promising.
What is your take about the general podcasting landscape? Because you've built this impressive funnel where daily podcasts, really specific lessons, this great call to action where you can learn more by getting onto the email list. It's just a beautiful system, and people really embrace that. And I know you recently launched a new show. I'm just curious, what's up with podcasting in 2025?
I was planning on doubling down on YouTube and doing the show at the same time. And my team was like, no, you're too burnt out. Just focus on one thing. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. If you subscribe to a YouTube channel, you might watch 20% of their videos. If you subscribe to a podcast, it's very likely that you're listening to every single show and for much longer than you would listen to YouTube. And so they serve different purposes, but I think they build trust in a similar way. And they're both very effective at getting a true fan base, unlike someone who's just reading some articles to get answers.
Yeah, I'll just say it for the record. I still think podcasts are the number one converting channel, aside from a sales call. And this is interesting for those of you listening that maybe haven't explored a podcast partnership or a advertising deal or doing a podcast round, getting yourself onto shows or interviewing your ICPs, even for a low volume podcast, splitting that up into useful nuggets that you can then redistribute to your mailing list or whatever. This is I think a under leveraged and pretty easy to execute conversion strategy for the audience that you do have.
Yeah, especially if you have systems for finding those good nuggets and repurposing them in other ways. I think repurposing content, like you're saying, it's undervalued. It's been around forever, right? But repurposing has to be intended for the medium it's in. So you take the chunk of the podcast that looks like a good clip and you use that as a clip. Or you take that same clip and you repurpose it as a well-written email and get that out there. And as long as you know your audience and you know what kind of messaging works for them, that's kind of what we're doing more of. You kind of have to be in their email, in their ears, on their screens. Not for everyone, but I think that may be one reason that podcasts are working so well, because this kind of long form, going deep, going longer means that you're engaging with them for more time, and you also have the opportunity to repurpose.
The more time thing is huge. And one of the things I'm curious about is the conversion from listening to a podcast into email. And I've seen you do this really effectively. There's a podcast that Jay Feldman does. He does a similar tactic to you. It's very effective. He comes on a quarter of the way through the episode and he's like, we're talking about this specific instance of this grander program. If you want to download a PDF that gives you the guide on how all of this stuff fits together, just go to mydomain/guide. What would you expect to be the conversion rate for something like that over time?
I'm not really sure, because our podcast is one opt-in. There's just one opt-in for the whole podcast. I kind of, right now on YouTube, we're experimenting between the two approaches. Do you have a specific lead magnet for every video, or do you do just one or two lead magnets that you keep mentioning. And
Right.
obviously, a lead magnet for every piece of content is a lot of work. But the most important thing, I think, regardless of which approach you take, is if you're directly referencing the thing that they would get in their email for free in the video or the podcast episode, that gives people like a sense that they're missing out. And you got to be careful with that because you don't want to shut people out of your content by saying like, you're not really experiencing this unless you go and download this thing. But I have found success with like a lot of the time on our YouTube videos, we just have flashcards that they can practice with. I'll be like, here are a bunch of, I'm literally holding a stack of blank index cards, but I pretend that they're the flashcards I'm talking about. And I'm like, you can use these if you download them and practice everything that we talked about in this video. And that has worked quite well.
So something that's like additive and that like couldn't be delivered via the podcast. So you're not feeling ripped off.
Yeah.
We did a segment about your talk in Mexico. It was such an interesting presentation. And I want to have you walk us through the genesis of the concept of giveaways as a sales and marketing tool. There's so many different touch points. Maybe you could describe the giveaway that you do, that you cite as responsible for so much of the growth of your company. You're doubling every 2 to 3 years. And I think giveaways are both extremely powerful and also take a lot of thinking about what would be appropriate for your business. Because it's like, not every business can just be like, register for this raffle to win a Tesla or whatever, So that's like the kind of starting point. So where did you hear about this concept of giveaways and how did it become so central to what you guys do?
Yeah, I think we started doing giveaways as far back as 2015. I had friends who had online businesses and they were using giveaways to get more business. But what they tended to do was, you can win this high ticket thing if you refer enough friends to get in. And I experimented with a few different approaches to giveaways, but what I found that really works with the giveaways is if you use the giveaway to go deep instead of going broad. So going deep means you're not asking each person in the giveaway to refer 5 other people in the giveaway. I think people feel like they're getting smaller and smaller. Even if that's statistically not true as far as their chances go, they still feel like they're asking a whole bunch of other people to join this thing, which maybe that's great for getting some cheap leads. But from my perspective, what's worked really well for us is focusing the giveaway on enhancing just one person's experience. So for example, we ask them to sign up for the giveaway. They put in their email. And right away, we would just say, hey, if you have a deep reason for fluency, I would love to hear it. And if you respond to the email, I'll give you another entry in the contest. And that kicks off.
So to start, how did you formulate what to give away?
That is, I think, really important because, well, we only give away our coaching ever. We don't give away something that's unrelated to our business because we use it to build this, not only this relationship that is built on the idea of learning Spanish, but also during the whole giveaway, this person is visualizing being in our coaching. They're imagining being in our coaching and they're doing assignments that are relevant to learning Spanish and to doing it through our coaching program. And because of that, not only do they stay more involved and feel a more personal experience because it's relevant to what we're doing, but they're also likely to buy coaching at the end of the giveaway if they don't win.
They're going to go through a lot of work to increase their odds. And then at the end, they're not going to win. But the magic is that somehow tons of them end up buying it. So how do you pull that off? Walk us through this.
First, there's the assignments themselves. And the assignments escalate their commitment toward learning Spanish. So, for example, I will ask them to, one of the last assignments in the contest is to tell all of their friends and family that they are committed to learning Spanish and to working really hard on Spanish every day for the next 6 months or whatever we're doing in the giveaway. If we're giving away 12 months of coaching, we say, tell your friends and family that you're going to work really hard on Spanish for the next 12 months. They need to be committed We've had people win, $3,000 worth of coaching and then not show up. And we don't want that to happen again. So we want them really to be committed. But another thing to keep in mind, so yeah, all of the assignments are designed to escalate their commitment toward doing very serious work on Spanish. But there's also a balance to be found when you do make the offer at the end. So we get everybody on a webinar, we do a live drawing, and one person wins. For the rest of them, we offer coaching. I think that there are two mistakes that we've made in the past. And one is giving them extra entries for buying coaching before the drawing, because that feels a little too manipulative. They're like, yeah, you've really just been kind of tricking us the whole time into buying something. The other thing is like actually not thinking of this giveaway so much as a way of getting sales. Instead, what we actually use this for, that's the most valuable thing, is one of the assignments in the giveaway is to get people to subscribe to our podcast, which is kind of silly because most of them came from the podcast. But for any who aren't subscribed, that rush of subscribers means that we chart every single time. So our podcast shoots up the charts just because of the number of people who are rushing to subscribe. The entire purpose of this whole giveaway, the number one reason we do it, is not to get sales, but actually just to increase that engagement and to get all those people rushing to subscribe to our podcast or to our YouTube or whatever it is.
Or they even get extra credit if they review your show and send you a copy of the review.
We have to be careful there. So we technically don't give them extra entries for reviewing our show, although we really do. But like we tell them, write me an honest paragraph telling me what you think of the show. Optionally, you can post that as a review, but what I want to see is your written thoughts. You know how hard it is to get podcast reviews. They write a really long paragraph saying everything they like about the show. And so asking them to post that after that is just very, very easy. And we get over 100 new reviews every time we do this.
So the concept of going deep, it's really about you're doing work on their behalf before outside of the product. So it's escalating them up the funnel. They're getting coached by you in advance. They're sort of qualifying themselves as good customers. They're taking actions with the brand. And plus, there's this potential for a big, big payoff. In the meantime, I'm getting engagement. I'm getting paid off along the way. The end game idea of like this concept of doing the work in front of them, like this is exactly how you're going to feel when you're inside the product. But we're just going to put it before the paywall. I'm curious about just like the general workload of these giveaway launches. What does it look like as a project?
If you've never done it before, it is an enormous amount of work. And as I mentioned, even if you have done it, it's a lot of work. But basically, you have to put together your whole sequence of emails that people are getting for being in the giveaway. Each of the assignments has to do something to escalate their commitment toward winning. And then the most work that there is responding to all of the emails. So for every assignment in the giveaway, they are responding to an email, a broadcast you've sent from your, email provider account. We use Kit. And what it does is since they're responding to those emails, our deliverability stays so high. They're like responding to the emails. And the reason they're doing that is because they get a response from me every time. So they feel like there's this personal back and forth, which is something that's especially, I think now, really rare. People don't expect to get a response from an email broadcast. That's really the most of the work is responding to all those emails. I do have team members that are using templates to draft the emails for me, but I actually do hit send on every single email in these giveaways.
Incredible. And, you're really describing to us a flywheel. It's touching every point of the business. They're appreciating the product. They're making reviews. You're charting on the post. You're getting feedback from them immediately when they don't like something. And to boot, your email delivery is through the roof. Yes, a lot of work to do something like this, but leverage.
Yes, it is. And one thing that we do in terms of the flywheel is one of the assignments is we ask them, what's the thing that has frustrated you the most about learning Spanish? We typically get a nice long paragraph. We copy and paste those paragraphs into a document that we use, and then we can analyze that for the right wording to use when we describe their own frustrations in our marketing materials in future promos. So yeah, it all kind of works together pretty beautifully.
A lot of folks find it really difficult to scale a coaching model because you have to make margin on top of the coaches. Like, how do you think about keeping a healthy margin on top of what you're paying your coaches to deliver the premium product?
Very good question. Still figuring that out. So we try to make sure that all of our units are 50% profitable. I think that's not enough. I think in an ideal world, if a student pays us $1,000, we should be paying the coaches $300 or $400 really. But right now we're paying them $500. So what that means is we have coaches that are paid. Some are paid by the hour to work with our students. And then we also have a lot of people on salary managing those coaches, or, our tech team building our software that supports the coaches and everything. And so our overhead is really high. And what this means is in the language learning market, it's very hard for us to raise prices. We've tried it before and lost business. And so for us to be able to charge even what we are charging, like about $400 a month for coaching, it takes some really strong defense on like why we're better. But then the only way for us to really be profitable as a business is through volume, by having hundreds of coached students at a time. So it's not for the faint of heart. It is a pretty stressful business to be in because, even if you're at 7 figures, that just means your stress is going to be higher when your margins are not high. Any given month can be the difference of making $10,000 or losing $10,000.
On that front, we've been having a discussion on the show about growth versus operations. You mentioned like my integrator and I, we are the marketing team. And why have you held on to marketing? And do you think it's feasible to bring somebody into the business to take over growth?
Again, discussions I've been having at every DC event. We started as a personal brand. So I think that if you're trying to get out of being the only person in charge of marketing, you have to do it a couple of years before you step out of that role. Partly because you have to condition your audience to not just expect you as the founder to be around all the time, but also because delegating something as personal and as specific to the business as growth is, like growth is the founder's role. Like classically, the CEO is kind of in charge of growth. And every time I've tried to delegate too quickly, things have gone badly. So currently what I'm working on is, yes, building those new channels like YouTube and working on paid ads, doing it myself. But this time, unlike with the podcast, documenting my process of everything the whole time, like the way that I write scripts, the way that I work with my editor, the way that we do all these things, so that hopefully we can delegate some of that, or at least maybe supplement it with, maybe I do half the videos and someone else on my team does the other half. But it is really hard if you're like, oh, I'm going to level up by delegating, and you don't do it with enough oversight. I think in business circles, we don't talk enough about how that can actually go badly if you hand things off in a careless way.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more. Like, how quick is too quick and how much oversight is oversight?
I tried to delegate leadership and management. I had someone in the integrator role for 4 or 5 years who wasn't a very good integrator. And he still loves the company, but his strengths were not integrator strengths. And he wasn't the right person to lead meetings and things like that. And he knew it too. So he was actually learning to become a full stack developer on the side. And now he's the director of technology and thriving in that role. But I think that if you're a founder, hopefully you have strengths in leadership, in growing the business, and in finding perspective and trying to find vision. Your job as the owner and founder is these specific things, especially like vision and strategy, growth, and leadership. And you should be the slowest to delegate those things and oversee them.
So one of the things that's interesting about the way you run your company is that you do have a lot of innovation and growth, and you are getting a lot of time there. So I've been talking about this idea of like the seal, and using things like EOS and an integrator to create a seal in terms of delivery, for accountability, for day-to-day operations, such that you can focus on innovation and get yourself to 5 mil. That seems to be a reliable path to doing so. How do you create that seal? In other words, like, why aren't you like most founders who wake up in the morning and pray that they can like post on Facebook at the end of the day to market their company because they spend all day long actually running the company? You managed to do the opposite.
I've been trying to do this for about 4 years, but it has now become something I'm actually doing pretty consistently, which is to work on marketing versus leadership versus other things on different days of the week. I try to do all of my marketing tasks only on Mondays and Thursdays. And the reason that's 2 days is because we're in a period where marketing needs more of my attention. And then I do leadership and strategy style things on Wednesdays. I think of this as strategy and vision rather than marketing, because we're talking business. We're not talking Spanish. And then I have other days that are for calls. Like I have meetings and calls, typically team meetings on Tuesdays, plus a few sales calls. And then sales calls, like pretty much Friday is dedicated to that, and I'll squeeze in a few tasks. But that really helps me just try to be in one mindset each day. And then the other thing that's helped with that is trying to reserve my mornings for focused strategic work whenever I can. Because if I get up first thing in the morning and I just do my deepest work then, that has the best results than if I try to squeeze it in between meetings later in the day.
It's like to have an efficient engine, like to combust effectively, you need strong seals. And so if the seals get leaky and cracked, and now the work is the fuel, to stick with the metaphors, like it's just like it's all over the place.
Can I ask you, when things are hard, when you're like, okay, I need to double down and work really hard and solve all these problems, how do you make sure that you form that seal and unplug? Are you able to unplug fully during evenings and weekends with your family?
I think the interesting thing is, from a work perspective, yes, but from a responsibility perspective, no. It just follows you around like a shadow everywhere. You're always going to be responsible for the business. I think it's tough to shake that. This is why we think about selling. We think about the liquidity event. And then we want to take on another responsibility. So on the one hand, like when you're in this mode of chronic responsibility, it can be tough to find other people who relate to that. That can feel like a curse, but I also think it's a real blessing too. The idea of reframing that as an opportunity for agency and freedom in your life, that you are carrying a load and that it is kind of a beautiful thing. It's something that founders miss the most, actually, is this sense of my actions have weight, even though it's limited. It's not some Jesus complex or whatever, but what we're doing matters to a bunch of people. And I should make some good decisions on Monday morning.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me is just to check myself and be like, if you're feeling a little stressed, I try to reframe it as, this is positive. This is my job to be responsible for this. And I'll try to do a good job on Monday morning. But for now, I'm going to go for a bike ride.
Yeah.
I'm really thankful that you were able to come and share with us. What I love about the way, how like people take a piece of content that worked on one platform and they just like dunk it in another one and it's crickets. And I think that podcasts and business ideas, sharing ideas and tactics are a little bit like that. There's this concept of a giveaway that is as old as time in business, and it works really well. It's proven. And for so many listeners, it could really absolutely make the difference in their business as it has in yours. What I think is interesting is that you just didn't take it at face value, that you completely processed it through the lens of your ICP and connected that directly to your product. And you took a basic idea, a powerful idea, but you processed it vis-a-vis your brand and made it work for your customers. And you pulled off this amazing coup, which is, for so many of us, we just dunk the tactic in. Everybody gets pissed off that you ripped me off, like you made me do all this work and I didn't win the giveaway. But in your case, you're getting passionate reviews, excited customers. People are actually learning Spanish without paying you $1. And sometimes that's the best way to actually get them to pay you the most, which is like, I've already got the result. I trust that I'm going to get a lot more when I pay for the premium product.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, it really is care. Like if you care about your business, if you care about your customers, you will iterate. You'll be slow to delegate and quick to find new solutions. You're going to have that kind of top idea on your mind all the time because there's always stuff to solve, but that's because you really care about it and you really want to succeed. And so instead of just plugging a tactic in and seeing if it works, making sure that it's aligned with your vision, aligned with what you want for your customers and what they deserve, and that everybody on your team is aligned with that vision as well. If anybody wants to reach out to me and just chat about any of the ideas that we've discussed here, I love talking business.
Amazing. How can people reach out to you, Tim?
Timothy at LearnCraftSpanish.com.
Timothy, thanks. As always, I love always jumping on a call with you and I always learn something. And thanks for sharing that with our audience here today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. This was really fun.